All right. Hi, guys. I hope you are all doing well. So today we're going to go over the first portion of chapter 10. Now, chapter 10 is, of course, going to be your longest chapter. We talked about this before I left. This is because this is your fish chapter, which is going to be the main key component of this class. So this chapter I have broken down into 3 sections. So this is the first. You should have already taken the notes, so hopefully you've already got a little bit of idea of what we're getting into today. So before we get started, I've put this note on this first section on here because I always get someone who says something about it. So the word fish versus fishes. So I always get fishes aren't a word. The posters behind me, I always have someone tell me that that poster's wrong because it says fishes. So fish refers to one or more individuals of the same species. The word fishes actually is correct because it's referring to multiple species. So I'm just going ahead and putting that out of the way before I get started so that I don't get people telling me that fishes isn't a word. All right, so starting off, a fish is of course going to be an aquatic vertebrate. We've already done our invertebrate chapter. Now we're getting into those that have backbones. Now we all know that fish also have structures such as gills, fins, and are typically going to be covered in some type of scale. Now there are more than 28,000 species of fish. This in total is going to be more than any other vertebrate combined. Doesn't matter, land, water, anything. All of the other vertebrates combined, there's still more types of fish. So obviously fish are going to be our dominant species that we are going to find in our seas, lakes, and streams. Now, many animals that are called fish are not actually considered a fish, so you have to be careful. Examples of these, the jellyfish, it's not actually a fish, it's an invertebrate, it's the scenarian that we talked about last chapter. Same thing with cuttlefish, that is going to be a type of mollusk. You're going to have your starfish, which in reality is going to be a type of ectoderm, and then crayfish, again, is going to be a type of arthropod. So these aren't actually fish. So be careful, just because fish is in the name doesn't mean it is actually that same category of animal. But on the flip side of that, there are a lot of animals that are considered fish that don't have fish in the name. So examples of this are going to be things like seahorses, no fish in the name, but they are considered a type of fish. They are vertebrates. Eels are a type of fish. Sharks are a type of fish. And rays and skates, which there's a difference between the two. We'll talk about that in the next section. But those are both also considered vertebrates and are in that fish family. Now, where do our fish come from? Fish obviously are going to be the oldest things out there because they are going to be where life originated, which is in the ocean. So they were our very first vertebrates. Their fossils date back millions and millions of years ago, back in the Cambrian period. Now, the difference is those fish were very, very simple. They had no scales. They did not have any paired fins, which are going to be the 2 fins on either side of them. They didn't have any type of jawbone. So they were really as basic as evolution needed them to be up until that point in time. So some of these jawless fish belonged to one of the classes called Agnesia. These were going to be our first that we have on fossil record. They pretty much stayed unchanged for about 100 million years. But at this time, the ocean itself remained unchanged, so they didn't have to evolve a whole lot. But once our Earth started to come out of that baby phase, if you will, they then had to either evolve or die off. So about 450 million, about 450 million years ago, we have now moved on, and those jawbones and pair fins have started to show up in these modern fish. So again, they had to evolve, or eventually they were going to die off. So this is where we got our first group of jawed vertebrates. Typically, these were going to be much larger predators than the jawless fish before them. And these fish that now have jaws are the ancestral predators that pretty much make up all the future vertebrates that we see today. It doesn't matter what they are. These are going to be the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparent of all our species that we still find in the ocean to this day. Now, jaws are thought to evolve from the first pair of skeletal elements that support the pharynx, which of course is going to be a fancy word for the throat. So eventually these gills that were in these jawless fish, I'm going to move this real quick, were actually evolved to create this closing mechanism so they could actually maneuver and manipulate their jaw in order to better catch and eat prey. Now, this also caused an evolutionary trait such as paired fins to occur. Now, paired fins, like I said, are going to be the fins that come in twos, hence the word paired. They're on either side of the fish's body. So this can be those pelvic fins, this can be those pectoral fins. So these are going to be paired fins, and these help the fish have a lot more stability in the water, not to mention speed and also maneuverability. So they can turn on a dime now because they have these paired fins mechanisms, and as opposed to having that eel-shaped body. Now moving on, this is getting to the Devonian period. This is going to be about 360 to 400 million years ago. Now this one specifically, we're going to call the age of fishes. So remember that. There's a reason they're underlined and highlighted. So we call this the age of fish because this is going to be a very vast period of different types of species of fish. We've now evolved to kind of break off into whole new groups. There's a big pool of diversity in the ocean at this period. So now all 4 living classes of fish and then the 3 subclasses of them were established by this time. So what that means is we have a bunch of different types of classes of fish. The osteocytes, these are going to be your bone fish. So we'll talk about that again a little bit later down the road. But at this period of time, all of our ancestors have now occurred. So now it's all up to evolution. All the beginning fish, they've arrived. Now, a lot of the fish that were in that period, of course, now are extinct. Of course, not everything evolved. A lot of things died off. But a good example of this is going to be your placoderms, armored fish. So if you look into the tank that has cuttles in it, that suckerfish is called a placo. That's going to be the modern version of a placoderm. The ancient version of placoderms were armored all the way down, very, very large, and are obviously extinct this day. Another example of this is going to be that Haziri, which is going to be, it was both fresh and saltwater. And it actually traveled up and down around Ohio to Tennessee, all the way up into freshwater spawn. So this again was another type of fish during that age of fishes, that Devonian period, that eventually did die off because evolution made it the weaker link. Now, with going about evolution, of course, the whole point in evolution is to create new adaptations that make a species stronger for the area that it's living in. In the case of fish, some of the biggest adaptations that they have are, of course, going to be their body shape. We talked a little bit about this in Marine 1. So fish have a fusiform body shape, is what it's called. So this essentially means that they are going to be very streamlined, almost torpedo shaped. This allows them to move rapidly through the water, and they're not going to have a lot of drag. Another adaptation that these fish are going to have is their color. Now, most species of fish are going to be what's called counter-shaded. So this is exactly what that bottom picture there kind of shows. This is where the dorsal, or the top of the fish, is going to be much darker than the ventral, or the underneath part of the fish. This is because when you're looking at a fish down into the water, having that dark top allows it to camouflage itself better when you're looking into the water. If you had a white fish, like those big koi fish, you can see them very clearly, but because they're darker, they blend in a little bit better. So they're better hidden from predators. Same thing with having that light bottom. If you're on the bottom of the seafloor and you're looking up, everything is very light and bright. So if you have a very dark belly, it may be a little bit harder for you to hide, but if you have another light, bright surface on you, so when they're looking up, you're a little more camouflaged, they're more likely to survive. So these are some pretty important adaptations that they have gained over the years. Now, of course, another one are going to be fins. We already talked about those paired fins. So we know that fins are going to be those wing-like paddle organs that are attached to different parts of the fish depending upon the species. of fish in which you are referring. These can also be found on some other type of aquatic animals, and we know that they're going to be used for moving through the water, propulsion, steering, balancing, so on and so forth. So here's a good illustration here of the different types of fins you're going to see. Pretty standard on most fish, of course. With different species, there are going to be some that don't have one type and do have another. So the dorsal fin, that is going to be the fin on their spine, on their very back. The caudal fin is going to be the back fin, the biggest fin, and it's going to be what propels them forward through the water. Then they're going to have their anal fin. This is going to be the one that is directly below that caudal fin, and this is going to be given to them for stability purposes. Then typically you will have a set of paired fins, which are going to be those pelvic fins. This is going to be right underneath their belly. You're going to have your pectoral fin, which again is going to be another type of paired fin. These are going to be the arms, if you will, there on either side of them. And then the operculum, this one people don't necessarily always think about as being a fin, but it's actually when you see a fish and you see the gills moving, the gills are actually a structure inside the fish. So what you're actually seeing is that gill cover, and it is a type of fin. No, it's not helping them move forward through the water, but it's helping water push over and off of those gills on the inside so that they're able to breathe. So that actually is considered a fin. Now, some other adaptations that you'll find on fish, buoyancy. Now, fish, specifically bony fish, have developed a very unique way of being able to determine their vertical position in the water column. So what I mean by this is a fish is able to maintain a middle ground. It doesn't have to be on the bottom of the ocean. It doesn't have to be at the top. It's able to swim in the middle without any excess effort put into having to stay down. So like with us, we would have to release air. We'd have to kind of hold ourselves down. We'd have to keep swimming down. Otherwise, we would just naturally race to the top. Fish don't have this problem. This is because they have a structure in their body called a swim bladder. So if you look at that picture there on the screen at the very top, that pink organ, excuse me, that is called a swim bladder. Now this swim bladder is actually going to hold gas, and dependent upon where they are in that vertical column of the ocean or whatever water body they're in, that will hold the amount of gas that it needs to hold them there. Now there are other types of fish, specifically your cartilaginous fish, which are going to be your sharks, your skates, and your rays, that don't have this that don't have this swim bladder structure. Instead, they have very, very large livers, and those livers actually hold on to excess fats or lipids, and this helps them to maintain that buoyancy in the water just the same way as the swim bladder does. Now, another type of adaptation is going to be how fish use their circulation. Now, fish have a two-chambered heart, and this means that they're going to have a single loop blood circulation. So you can kind of see from that second illustration there, they're going to have blood that goes to their body in one very simple loop. Ours is obviously very complex. This is going to allow them to hold a lot of extra oxygen in their body that's coming off of those gills. It's also going to allow them to compensate for a lot of the salt in the water. So this circulation is definitely going to be a big adaptation for them because they're relying a lot less on blood pumped to all their extremities in order to be successful. Excuse me. And then of course, efficient respiration. Fish again have those internal gills that have those gill structures over top of them, which are fins. They use these for gas exchange. Those gills are going to fan water out of around them. So you can see the picture of the fish that's actually dissected here. You can actually see those gill rakers is what they're called. And the water is going to pass over those rakers, collect the oxygen, and then they will actually put the rest of the water back out into the ocean. So all of that extra surface area that they're getting from those gill rakers that are pushed over water by those gill fins are going to give them a much more efficient source of respiration than if they were just breathing in and out. Now let's talk a little bit about homeostasis. Now homeostasis isn't necessarily an adaptation as much as just the fish being able to compensate for their environment. So homeostasis is essentially going to be where fish are able to maintain how much salt and water is in their bodies in comparison to the environment around them. So bony fish specifically are considered hypoosmotic regulators. What this means is that in a bony fish, which is going to be typically what you think of when you think of a fish, it's going to be fish that have a skeleton. Excuse me. Now the tissues of these bony fish, they're actually going to be less salty on the inside than the water that is around them. This is because they're actually going to allow a lot of the water and salt that they take in is going to go back out both through its gills whenever it's pumping water past those rakers, and actually from their skin as well. They'll actually secrete all that excess water and salt back out into the ocean so that they are staying a lot less salty than the water they're actually swimming in. This keeps them from becoming dehydrated. Of course, we all know if you drink too much salt water, you become dehydrated. So this allows them to take in water and then get rid of that salt so they can drink without taking in large amounts of sodium. Then, of course, one of the biggest ways to get rid of salt is through your urine. So another adaptation that they've used to maintain that homeostasis is, of course, to have a bit of concentrated urine coming out of them from time to time, which just means that it has gone through their circulatory system, gone past all of their needs, and then once it gets rid of the amount of salt that it needs, it's going to go out anytime they use the bathroom. And then again, their gills, of course, are able to secrete that salt as water is moving past those gill rakers. Now, freshwater fish, on the other hand, they're going to be considered hyperosmotic. So saltwater is hypoosmotic, freshwater is hyper. Now, they're going to be the exact opposite. So in freshwater fish, their insides and their tissues are going to be saltier than the water they're swimming in. So this would just be like if we hopped into the water, we would probably be considered saltier than the water depending on where it is. So water is, of course, just like with any other type of fish, going to be continuously entering the body through its skin, through its gills, as it eats, as it drinks. So to overcome this, freshwater fish don't actually drink the water that they're in. So where saltwater fish are actually going to just swim through the water and drink it in and then get rid of the salt, freshwater fish don't actually have to do it because they're naturally just going to get so much water dissolved into their bodies. And then they do, of course, produce large amounts of dilute urine, which are going to be sodium-free urine as compared to saltwater fish, which have to get rid of all of that extra salt from their urine. So they're pretty much going to conserve as much salt in their body as possible compared to saltwater fish. Now let's talk a little bit about their sensory. Now, of course, this is very, very varied dependent upon the species. So this is just an overview of them as a species. It's a very large category. So fish, of course, have eyes. Now, fish eyes are very similar to a lot of the eyes on land vertebrates. However, they are missing a couple of key structures. For one, their eyelids. Fish do not have eyelids. This is why they always say fish can't sleep, fish don't blink. This is because they don't actually have that eyelid structure because they don't need it. Fish also, of course, do have ears and do hear. These ears are going to be a lot different. They are not going to be sounds as much as they are going to be vibrations that are moving through the water, are what these ears, these internal ears, are actually going to pick up. So if you got in the water and yelled, they're not going to hear a yell, but they're going to feel those vibrations on their eardrums, and that's how they will detect you. Taste and smell. They do have the ability to detect chemicals of the environment. This is a type of chemoreception, very much how we have taste buds. Fish are going to have those chemoreceptors on their tongue and mouth structures that are going to do the same exact thing. Those chemoreceptors are going to pick up on those sensory differences. You can see a fish has nostrils, so they do have the ability to, again, use those chemoreceptors in the inside of those nostrils to pick up changes in their environment. So it's not exactly like smelling fresh baked cookies. So it's a little bit different. A good example of this is a shark smelling blood. It's not so much that blood has a iron smell to them as much as just those chemoreceptors are going to the brain saying something nearby is injured. And then there are, of course, certain types of fish, the most obvious one being a catfish that have things like barbels, which are like whiskers, that are actually a type of organ that allow them to feel similar to our fingertips. And then they, of course, do have feeling on their skin, on their fins, on their lips. So when you hook a fish, they do feel it. They do have that sense of touch. Now, fish do have one type of unique sense that is going to be different from any other type of animal on the planet. This is called the lateral line. So the lateral line system is going to be that line that you see going all the way down on a fish. I always point to the stuffed animals that I have like hot glued to the wall up there. You can literally see the line that they've illustrated down that stuffed animal. So these are a system of canals which are essentially lined up with nerve endings. And whenever there is vibrations in the water around them, those canals actually will pick up those vibrations, and it allows the fish to kind of protect themselves even if they're not looking directly at the threat. So if you've ever wondered why there's fish in the river and you reach out to grab one and it's always a second ahead of you and it's super quick, that's because it has this lateral line system that as soon as your fingertips touch that water and that first ripple happens, instantly that lateral line system and all those neuromass systems, all those detection cells are automatically determining that, hey, there's vibration, there's someone behind you, there's someone coming to get you. And those receptor organs are so highly sensitive to how that water changes around them. So definitely unique. It's not one of those things like, as a human, if someone walks up behind me and breathes, I have this special line on my body that tells me that there's now some kind of motion in the air. So definitely a very useful, unique sense, especially to a lot of the fish species that may not necessarily have the best visibility or the best way to detect if there's a predator nearby, because there's a lot of other environmental factors that are affecting how it sees, how it hears, how it smells. So these are definitely going to be very, very important for the survival of the species. Now, another unique type of sense, this one is going to be specific to cartilaginous fish. And remember, I said that was going to be your sharks, your skates, and your rays. These are called the ampullae of Lorenzini. Now, these sound like a really expensive Italian dish, but what they are is, if you actually look at the bottom of a shark's head, like up under its nose, there's going to be a bunch of little teeny tiny dots up under its nose. And a lot of the times they're very, very small, so you don't necessarily see them unless you look really, really close. Now, these are going to work very similar to that lateral line system because sharks are not going to have that neuromass running down them. So these are very similar. These little bitty dots are actually going to be sensory organs that are going to detect the bioelectric fields that, again, are going to be generated by other living animals and other things in the environment's muscles. So how the lateral line system on a fish, if you stick your hand in the water, the fish feels the vibrations of the water in that lateral line system and they can go away. Similar with this, sharks, when they have this on the bottom of them, this ampullae of Lorenzini, what happens is if they're swimming up above and a fish moves below them, the muscles in the fish that's moving are actually sending out bioelectric fields similar to that of ripples. And those little bitty Lorenzini nerves are going to pick up those little electrical impulses put off by those muscles. And that's why a lot of the time sharks do stay towards the top, because all of those ampullae are facing down towards the bottom. So they're able to sense when things are moving below them, so they can actually kind of scan the water as they're hunting. All right, so another type of adaptation that we're going to see in both bony and cartilaginous types of fish are actually going to be their how they thermoregulate, meaning how they control their bodies, incongruent with the temperature of water that they're in. So fish are poikilothermic. I always had tongue-tied on that one. So this just means that their whole body temperature is going to adjust dependent upon their environment. So if you are a fish and you're in cold water, then your body is cold. If you're in hot water, then your body is hot. It's as simple as that. So they're going to be essentially opposite from us. So most birds and mammals, of course, are going to be homeothermic, which is going to be where we maintain a pretty constant body temperature. This is why you see a lot of mammals, whales, specifically in cold water climates, because they maintain that cold water temperature, and they have a warm body because they're not entirely dependent upon their environment for where their body temperature is going to be. So they're going to rely on the water that they are in. Now, we're going to talk about two different types of fish. So we're going to kind of break down the classification a little bit. So fish, of course, are going to belong to the kingdom Animalia. So they are animals. Specifically, they're going to be broken down even further into the phylum Chordata, which just means vertebrae. And that brings us to the subphylum, which is Vertebrata. So they are relatively simple there on that breakdown. As far as taxonomy, of course, we know that they are going to have a backbone. Most of the time, they're going to have that endoskeleton, which just means that they are going to have that skeleton that supports them, protects them, just like it does for us, gives their body shape, gives them a place for the muscles to attach. We are going to talk about how cartilaginous fish have a little bit of a different type of skeleton, but all in all, they're going to be very similar to a lot of the animals in that kingdom and phylum. Now, there are going to be 4 classes of fish. So I've been saying bony fish and cartilaginous fish here for a while because those are going to be the main ones that we are going to really break down in your second and third part of this chapter. So bony fish, also known as osteocytes, these are going to be the majority of fish. Like I said, these are going to be the ones that we're the most familiar with. This category is going to account for about 96% of all of our fish species. Chondrocytes, these are going to be your cartilaginous fish. This is going to be sharks, skates, rays, and all of their relatives. Then you're going to have your hagfish and your lampreys, which we're going to break down today. So we discussed already briefly a little bit about the jawless fish, how those were the first class of fish that were going to evolve from the ocean. Still to this day, we do have a number of species of jawless fish that are still in existence. These are typically going to be divided between those 2 classes of lampreys and hagfish. Now, members of both groups, of course, are going to still be lacking those jaw structures. They're not going to have internal ossification, which just means they're not going to have a skeleton. They're going to be very similar in shape to an eel. They don't have scales. They don't have those paired fins. So again, these are the simplest of the simple. And we'll watch a video on, I believe it's on lampreys. So you'll see those actually in real life in action. Now, both of these groups are going to share the pore-like gill structure that they had. Remember, this is before we actually had that fin over the gills. So instead, they basically just had little slits or openings or pores, and water just came and went through those. So they weren't very effective, but this definitely was a good starting point for evolution. And it just so happens some of them hung in there and are still swimming around today. So starting off with hagfish, there are 70 species of hagfish. These are going to be all marine, meaning that they're all in the salt water. Typically, they're going to be found on the bottom of the ocean, so you don't have to worry about running into these on the beach. They are going to be scavengers, meaning that they're going to eat on dead or dying fish. Because of this, and because they're at the bottom of the ocean, it's very, very dark. so they don't require eyesight. So evolution has given them the joy of being blind. They actually will instead find their prey, if you will. It's not alive, so it's hard to call it prey, by their keen senses of smell and touch, which we've already discussed how they manage that. And so whenever they do come across something that looks especially dead and tasty, they'll actually enter the animal through an orifice, meaning a body opening, a lot of the times mouth, nose, eye, something like that. And they'll dig into the body and eat pieces with their toothed plates on their tongue. So again, they don't have jaws, they can't chew. So instead, and I have a picture of the inside of their mouth, I'll show you in a bit, they just have this plate type face with these teeth, and the tongue actually has like a little pincher at the end of it. So really gross creatures. But what is the most gross part of our hagfish is going to be their ability to produce slime. So when a hagfish feels threatened, it will actually release this slime from those same glands along the surface of its body. And then when that chemical is released into the water, it turns into this very thick, slippery goo. So you can definitely see the examples here. It's thick enough that you could pick it up by itself. You can see it hanging from the net. Just gross, so gross. Makes them almost impossible to catch. Very, very nasty stuff. In some places, of course, we're going to assume for the most part it's over in Asian countries, these are a delicacy that they will eat, and they actually do roughly manhandle them so that they will release that slime, and they eat that as well. So to each their own, right? And then our other type of jawless fish, these are going to be a lot more well known. This is going to be our lampreys. There are 38 species of them. Now, these can be marine or freshwater, and actually most of the time we're going to see them in freshwater habitats. These, unlike their cousins, are going to be free living or parasitic. We all know what that means. That means it's going to live off of a host, typically by attaching to them. And then they are going to have that mouth. You can see the picture down at the bottom. That almost looks like a ring or a disc. And it has all of those teeth. It'll latch on, and then it actually feeds on the blood and body fluids of whatever poor unfortunate soul it has attached to. So very similar to leeches. They're like the original leech. So they'll actually attach and inject an anticoagulant, which essentially just creates very quick blood flow. And then eventually that species will die and they'll move on to the next one. So you can see they basically are a big leech. And when I return, we will actually dissect one of these beautiful creatures. Now, like I said, lampreys can be fresh or marine water species. Typically, they're going to be in the ocean for their adult lives. Then they'll swim upstream in fresh water to mate and spawn. And then they will leave and spend the rest of their life up those streams. This makes them what is called androgynous. So that just means they're going from being born in the freshwater, adult life in the saltwater, and then going back to freshwater to start families of their own. So to do so, they actually will swim up these streams and they will make little nests of pebbles or stones, and they'll actually form a depression in which they will plant their eggs at. And then when spawning actually occurs, the female will actually attach its little teeth into a large rock near the nest, and then the eggs will be put down into that nest. The male will come over, fertilize them, and when he does so, those eggs turn sticky and they'll adhere to the pebbles down at the bottom of the stream or the river, and they'll cover them up. And then about 2 weeks later, you'll have a bunch of little teeny tiny larvae, which look like little bitty worms or maggots, and those will eventually turn into the lampreys we can see as adults today. And then for about 3 to 7 more years until eventually they'll return and do the same for themselves. Now, typically you're going to find that those that are androgynous, meaning they're freshwater to saltwater to freshwater, are actually going to live a lot longer than those that stay strictly into that fresh water. This is because they're going to have a lot better of a food source, of course, in the ocean, and they're also going to develop a much better immune system, if you will. They're going to not have quite so many degenerating qualities if they are prone to be able to live in that salt or freshwater environment. So here's a couple of different examples of the internal structure of some various lamprey mouths. So like I said, they are going to attach and eat off their host, but some of them eat different things. So you can see the blood eater, the blood feeder, the flesh feeder, those that are going to be non-parasitic, and then some of the bottom pictures show the shape difference as well. So again, very simple animal, very gross animal, but even being as simple as it is and not really having been touched by evolution, they've still managed to survive all these millions of years. So we're just going to do a couple of species spotlight, which I'll do these at the end of each one of these sections to kind of let you know you're at the section, just to give some examples. So of course, for this one, we are going to see our sea lamprey, and then tell you a little bit about an example of these. So the sea lamprey, even though it is of course called sea lamprey, again, coming into that fresh water, we've actually had a problem with this in the United States, up around Michigan. So lampreys were not a common fish in the areas around the Great Lakes, and all the way up into Niagara Falls. And then humans went in and dug a very large canal to allow ships into the Great Lakes and to the ocean. This was back in like 1913. And when they built this big pass, this allowed for these animals to now come into these freshwater environments. So Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, all of these sea lampreys came into these areas and actually, as an invasive species, completely ruined what fishing were in these areas, because they had just absolutely spawned out of control. They had no natural predators, very similar to the lionfish conversation that we had a few chapters back. So sea lampreys up in these areas, you can see the devastation they've caused on some of the fish pictures here, leaving just those big old wounds. Definitely not a fish you can sell at market. So they were a big problem at the time. So that is it for the first section of your chapter 10. You will have a quiz on this first section, so make sure you get all these notes in your journal. You'll have a quiz, and then later on we'll start our second section. You'll have a little assignment on that. We'll do your third section, and then we'll wrap it all up with your test. So make sure you are staying on top. Like I said, this is a large chapter, so if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I am happy to help you guys. Let me know if you need anything.